Welcome to the Impact Room, brought to you by Douglas Jackson, who help you hire more impactful, diverse leaders who stay for longer and are more successful. The Impact Room is a business, CX and leadership podcast where exceptional, diverse and impactful leadership and wisdom is shared. We dive deep into pressing topics that impact your customer-led business, featuring interviews with CEOs, COOs, Chief Customer, Chief People Officers, directors, influential leaders and subject matter experts who share their lived experiences, top tips, thoughts, advice and industry trends to help elevate existing and future talent. So let's dive into our next episode, and please don't forget to like, subscribe or share if you enjoy this content. Thank you. Okay then, so hello, I'm Michelle Ansell, Managing Partner at Douglas Jackson. Today in the Impact Room, I'm joined by Stewart Davison, who's worn many hats across a fascinating career which started in the British Army and includes Proptech, real estate, facilities and strategic advisory. Working across social housing and technology companies, Stewart is passionate about helping shape smarter, more inclusive solutions using technology as a force for positive change, helping drive meaningful innovation in sectors like social housing. So I'm looking forward to hearing and learning more today. Stewart, hello, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks, Michelle. Nice to meet you. Looking
Yeah.
forward to a good one today.
Yeah, indeed. Stuart, as we've just touched on, really, you've had a rich and varied career across both the public and the private sectors. Obviously, as we've said, real estate, facilities, and then digital innovation in housing. So if we look back, I mean, what key moments or lessons stand out for you? How have they shaped how you lead and drive change, would you say?
Well, I mean, if we start from the transition from the British Army into social housing, you can imagine, that's from one extreme to the other, really.
Yeah,
Um, and I think what I learned very much there was taking kind of the passionate pragmatism, passion for the sector, but a pragmatic approach, and just really having to shape it and having to shape the way that I was leading teams within the organisations I work with. I think it was fair to say there were some rough edges that needed to be knocked off.
hmm
It's a very different leadership approach, as you can imagine, in the
yeah,
military than it is into the public and private sector. So I would definitely see the first few years after the army as a real steep learning curve for me in terms of taking some of the positives from the military experience and just trying to adapt and shape and change the way that I was doing things. And I think I was really lucky that I had really good senior managers across all the organisations I worked with in those early days,
yeah,
both at Brunel Care, which was a housing association in Bristol, at the City Council, and also in the 14 and a half years that I spent at Capita.
hmm
I always see Capita as a real business apprenticeship.
hmm
I think that's probably where my leadership was really honed and sharpened. I was very fortunate that I was given the opportunity to work across a number of different parts of the business, doing a lot of different things, and I think that put me in a really good stead when I really wanted to do a lot more in the social housing sector, and I also wanted to stretch my wings a little bit as a NED and as a trustee. So
yeah,
that led into a stint with Shelter Cymru, which is a homelessness charity in Wales. I've been a long-term trustee of a mental health charity called Platform,
hmm
again in Wales. And yeah, and I've done other numerous roles. I was chair of a contracting company for a housing association. And really, all of those experiences have just kind of built on top of one another.
mm,
And I was also really fortunate that I had the opportunity to do a master's in leadership and management whilst all this is going on. So I have
yeah,
real experience to draw on. And when I kind of reflect back, I think it's that diversity
mm,
of leadership experiences that all kind of get bundled up together. And I kind of come to the point now, and I think I'm well armed with a lot of experience, good and bad. And I think as a leader, it's always taking those learning opportunities from everything you do, adapting the way you do things, and then on to the next thing, and that constant cycle of adaptation, learning, and change. So that's definitely something I would say to people, if you're really looking to progress as a leader, it's being adaptable and open to change.
It's interesting, and when just as you were talking, and I was thinking about the evolution of leadership generally, certainly if we look at command and control versus today, when we're talking more about authentic, open, transparent leadership, just to stay on that point for a little while, if you wouldn't mind, Stuart, do you think, in some respects, because all of the things that you've learned have allowed you to be what you have said, you've took that as a foundation. But if I wasn't at your level of experience, let's just say, do you think having a more structured approach to start with, and then as you ease and become more comfortable in yourself, is a way for people that are perhaps starting on that journey versus just being themselves and then putting in place a structure? I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that?
It's interesting because to a certain degree, you have to have a persona. You have to it's that putting on your game face.
Yes.
I mean, leadership and management are different things. They're part of the same equation, but they can be very different. You can be an outstanding manager, but not necessarily a leader, and vice versa. And it's only when you get the experience, probably, or if you've got it naturally, to be able to bring those two together. So, if you're starting your journey in management, let's say, which is the most predominant thing, then yes, there needs to be some kind of structure to what you're doing. And there's various models of management that work for different types of roles and for different scenarios. I'm not an advocate of one size fits all. I'm a real proponent of you take the bits that appeal to you, that perhaps mirror or match your natural style or the environment that you're operating within, and you create a hybrid. I go back to that, having that good fortune of a master's. If you are serious about a journey into leadership and management, then having that really is foundational, because it really sets out some of these models. It sets out ways that you can be self-critical of yourself and analyze different leadership ways. So I definitely think, if you've got the opportunity, look for some form of academic base, but really think about what's your natural style. Because if you try to adopt something that isn't part of your natural makeup, it will just come off false. You won't feel comfortable doing it, and therefore the chances of success are pretty low. So you have to find that blend of styles, perhaps, that meets and matches what you want to achieve.
Thank you. And of course, when you were responding, leaders aren't necessarily managers, are they? Anyone can be a leader. You can take a leadership position, can't you, without the title, almost sometimes, by having leadership attributes.
I mean, you can be a leader, but you can lead someone off the edge of a cliff.
Well, yeah, no, hopefully not that.
You know.
I was thinking more, you could step up in a team and start to
Yeah,
lead,
yeah,
couldn't
yeah.
you, without being
Yeah.
the leader?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There is that. There is that. I mean, I think I think traditionally it's being effective, isn't it? Fundamentally, whether it be as a manager or as a leader, it's probably being able, if you're going to be a true leader, it's having that strategic vision,
Mm,
and not always necessarily being the most effective when it comes to practical implementation skills.
mm,
I'm one of those people that is constantly looking ahead. So I'm I'm really quite poor at knuckling down
right.
and focusing on the implementation side. So I've been really good that I've been able to work with and have surrounding me really excellent people. And again, that's probably another piece of the jigsaw for leaders and managers. Sometimes people think they have to be outstanding and great at everything.
Yeah.
That's really rare.
Yeah.
If you can recognize your weaknesses
Mm,
and your skill gaps, And if you can find people to work with you and around you, which complement you and supplement you, and vice versa, that's where you get really high performing teams. And as a
Yeah.
leader, that's probably where I've been very fortunate when I've been in positions, I've been able to build or have access to those teams around me. And then it's just, it's a virtuous circle then.
Yeah, definitely agreed. And so when we were talking about leadership and management, but also as you've talked about, you've got a very established advisory, strategic advisor and non-advisory sort of career as well. I mean, you've mentioned some of the trustee and chair, and you're currently
Mm,
the vice chair at Elim Housing as well. So we speak to a lot of leaders sort of that are interested in looking at this sort of portfolio career, if you like. So if we look at, people who are naturally or already achieved leadership and good managers or what have you, what do you think it takes to be a good chair or a vice chair, or perhaps, a non-advised, an
mm.
NED? What would you say are the differences there, Stuart?
Very much having that ability to recognize and draw lines between strategic oversight and practical guidance.
Mm,
That split between having the strategic overview and not necessarily the delivery,
mm,
because sometimes that would be quite difficult to separate yourself from.
yeah.
As a Ned in particular, sometimes you just know you've got to stop because you've got a senior leadership team and a
Mm,
management structure and services that deliver everything.
mm,
You've got to just stop, and
mm,
you're there to have that strategic kind of oversight perspective. So definitely that split, you've got to recognize that. Most importantly, those relationship management skills, it's one of the most fundamental things. As a board member, you've obviously got the board team
mm,
and the SLT, the senior leadership team. They're usually your two most important sort of bodies that you've got to build trust and relationships with. But as a Ned, again, you've also got to think about making connections with staff and customers
mm,
and stakeholders. And that's all about building community and a coalition of the willing effectively.
mm,
And you can only do that through really sort of well-developed relationship skills. Um, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to be, again, the most outgoing person in the room.
mm,
It's just having that ability to connect
mm,
and see where you need to connect or see
mm,
where you need to be involved. So there's definitely that. And I think I used the term passionate pragmatist, earlier on, and I think for me, the Neds that I've seen over I think it's about 15 years now that
mm,
I've been a Ned across various organizations. The most effective Neds that I've seen have a real connection with the organization that they're a part of,
yeah,
that passion. So they
yeah,
bring their passion for what actually is being delivered by the organization, but they're also able to bring that pragmatic approach.
mm,
You know, we can't do everything that we'd want to do.
mm,
Sometimes we have to, as board members, make really difficult decisions that can affect people's lives,
mm,
their livelihoods.
mm,
And I think as long as you can sort of manage and balance the passion with the pragmatism, I think you can walk that fine line.
mm,
You can still have values. You can still bring your whole self to these organizations and to the roles you're doing, as long as you can kind of balance the two and switch
mm,
between the two. I think you're okay.
mm,
So yeah, that's kind of my reflections around board and chair, and you just got to have that ability to see the big picture, which is a
mm.
bit of a cliche, but it's kind of in the job role, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's interesting because I think when I was looking at some of the top businesses that what made a really fantastic leader, some of the best ones, they have a really strong board. And I think that's because they bring that board into the, integral workings of the organization. And I'm sure, hopefully you've not been on any, but I'm sure you've heard of boards where they can be sort of kept kept at arm's length by a business, and they're just there to do a certain thing, but they're not sort of the CEO or the exec, the exco, etc. They don't really sort of bring them in. I mean, if you were, let's say, on a board, and perhaps you weren't getting that exposure to the business that you felt would benefit all, would you have any advice? Is there something that you think someone can do in that situation, or do you just think it might be a bit difficult and maybe sort of
Yeah.
yeah.
You have to kind of find out if it's something culturally embedded within the organization, or if it's just an artifact of the way things have been done. I've actually had this happen.
Right.
And the way I approached it, I actually asked for a meeting with the chair and the chief exec, just to talk things over, just to kind of, it was quite early on that board, and I used it as an opportunity to give my reflections on what I was seeing and what I was experiencing, and then actually getting them to talk to me. And it was through that dialogue that actually we realized that, yes, probably some cultural artifacts that probably weren't even necessary or applicable anymore were leftovers, and it was stopping a greater level of involvement between the senior leadership team and the board. Now, the interesting thing in that scenario is it led into a much wider discussion across the entire board and leadership team about the organization itself. And it ultimately led into a transformation. And that changed the culture of the organization, the focus of the organization. We had a wholesale change across the board. We went through many iterations of senior leadership team, and I've landed on a place where it's a completely different organization to the one I joined.
Fantastic. Yeah.
So
Good.
it's not impossible. So it's not
No.
impossible to deliver, I'm not saying I was the catalyst there, but it was probably something that I was bubbling under.
Yeah.
And I think what I'm trying to get at is, if you feel confident enough, probably something not to raise in a board environment, actually there with the board, but there's nothing stopping you asking for a meeting outside of the normal board meeting calendar with the chief executive, with the chair, just to have that kind of reflective practice.
Yeah, good advice. Thank you. So if we look at Proptech, then something you know a lot about, and we know it's a game changer. I mean, tech in every environment, but certainly for housing and social housing, as we know, again, comes with its unique challenges, doesn't it? So what do you think are some of the most exciting or practical Proptech innovations you think could truly transform the social housing landscape? And then what do you think's holding them back, I suppose, from that wider adoption?
I've been an advocate of the Internet of Things for a very long time. I was probably one of the first people in the sector to actually stand up and use the term the Internet of Things way back in 2014. And it's taken us, 11 years to get to a point now where the housing sector, I think, recognizes the value within having sensors within properties. I think it's mature enough as a technology now, and I think leaders and organizations themselves can recognize the value they can get from IoT. So I definitely think IoT is definitely one there. I'm an advocate of simple technology that doesn't necessarily require massive project teams and long implementation timescales. So there's a technology which is peer-to-peer video triage. It's called remote guidance as well. Fundamentally, it's about connecting an expert with someone remotely in a completely different location. And it was something that I came across during COVID, very early, well, it's just before COVID lockdown. And I was really fortunate enough to go and visit an organization in Sweden who were doing this. It actually, funny enough, it had grown out of the Swedish military in Afghanistan, where they were connecting bomb disposal experts in Sweden with bomb disposal operators on the ground in Afghanistan, who would turn up, look at a bomb, and go, I don't know how to deal with this. So they would use secure video to video connection to connect the expert with someone on the ground. So fast forward that to COVID, the ability to connect, for example, a plumber or an electrician with a tenant using a smartphone to effect repairs or advice or guidance. So I think that's a fairly low cost solution using existing technology, but in a very different way that could deliver really interesting transformation around the repairs and maintenance service.
Yeah.
So I'm a big advocate of that. And then, of course, for anyone who's got a bingo card, I'd have to talk about AI. I'm actually off tomorrow addressing Fairhive Housing Association. They've got a staff day, so
Right.
I'm going to be stood in front of 300 staff talking about AI and how AI could be used in a social housing context. And for me, it doesn't matter if it's AI or IoT or any of the technologies that we use. For me, it's not about replacing humans. It's about freeing up time for the humans we have in our organizations to be more human. And as you can imagine, in social housing, we are a people
Yes.
orientated business.
Yes.
So actually, if we can find more time for the humans in the housing organizations to engage with tenants and residents on the human level by using technology, then I'm all for it.
Yeah.
So there's three sort of technology areas I mentioned there. Then we come to your second part of your question, which was what's stopping the sector. If we were having this conversation a couple of years ago, I probably would have said something on the lines of lack of experience at the senior level. That's changed dramatically over the past 2 years. There's a lot more board members now who have transformation skills, digital transformation, a strategic understanding of technology, which is really good. A lot of housing organizations have invested resources in beefing up their capabilities and experience in that area. So I think we're on a positive trajectory there. I think there is, though, still some fundamental barriers stopping us adopting some of this tech. And I don't know what it is, if I'm being brutally honest. Um, in the smaller organizations I'm a part of, we seem to be quite willing to embrace new areas of technology. And by that, I don't just mean let's run a pilot on a small scale and then forget about it and then move on to the next shiniest piece of tech.
Yeah.
We're actually willing to kind of, no, we go out, we research this. Yes, we can see there's value. We go for it, and I think sometimes it goes back to the point I made a couple of minutes ago. Not all tech has to be, really structurally complicated and require lots of project resources to be transformational. If you have people in your organization that have got the capability to keep abreast of what's going out there in terms of prop tech and tech in general for social housing, they are going to come across technology that could transform your organization that isn't necessarily going to cost you £1 million and take 3 years to implement and involve 100 people. So I would just say to the sector, be a little bit more adventurous. Push yourself out of your comfort zone slightly when it comes to tech.
Thank you. And talking, I mean, you say you're going to talk to, did you say Fairvale Housing? Fairhive, sorry, tomorrow on AI. And I mean, not to steal your thunder from that, but obviously this podcast will go out probably after that. But I mean, what will you be saying? Because funnily enough, I mean, obviously a lot of the guests that we've been speaking to lately have been talking about artificial intelligence. And one recently, she was the director of artificial intelligence, and Susan Caesar, she was ex-Airbnb and Daily Mail Group and Sage, so some big technologically advanced online, digital first businesses. And I was talking to her and we were talking about the importance, and I think the social housing sector is so important when it comes to Gen AI and how it's learning, because it has such a diverse customer base, and it has a lot of underrepresented or not, not, let's say, the higher, more affluent customer base who may be experimenting with Gen AI or the coders or whomever. And for it to learn, it needs us as a society to teach it. And I think, whether it's underrepresented sort of talent, people on a different in a different geographical location, whether socioeconomic, education, etc. We all need to be engaging with AI to sort of help it understand who we are and what we think, and that we are all very different as individuals. So to help, I mean, I'm asking a lot of questions here, but I mean, in terms of what you'll be saying to the team tomorrow, and how you see social housing can encourage its customers perhaps to utilize AI for the betterment of, us as society. What will you be saying to that, Stuart?
Well, the first thing I'm going to be saying tomorrow is that you have, with tools like Gen AI, so generative I think you have to let your imagination run riot a little bit. I use the term play, and I use that term, correctly. For the last 2 years, have been playing with different generative AI tools to try and find its limitations and try and discover interesting ways. So a classic one is I was doing my end of year accounts just the other week. I don't use an accountant because I'm quite fortunate. It's just me.
Yeah.
But I'd got to a little tricky bit, and it's almost like I needed to talk to someone. So I fired up ChatGPT, and we had a conversation for about 10 minutes. I actually used the voice function. So I was talking to it.
Yeah.
And I was basically saying, the tricky thing I was trying to deal with. And I looked at help desk functions, and I was thinking I was going to contact the accountancy package. And just through this conversation, I got to the solution, which was there somewhere, but I needed to unlock it. And that's through play, because I've used it for other things by talking to it. So I'm definitely going to be saying, don't be afraid to play with some of these tools, because through that act of play, you might actually come up with something later on that is really applicable. I always talk to organizations about, if you're going to embark on an AI journey and you see the value or the benefit within your organization, what you probably need to do is stop and create something for your tenants and residents. So if you're going to use Gen AI, for example, to help your customer services team diagnose problems or understand things, why can't create an assistant for the tenant and resident? Because actually, if you give them the tools, it might actually, by the time a query, a letter, a contact comes in, if they've been using an AI assistant, they may be giving you all the right information you need. So actually, you'll get to a resolution really quickly. So I definitely say, don't just think of internally your own organization. Think about, well, if we're going to do it for us, why can't we roll something out for tenants and residents as well? So to me, that's really important. And I usually finish off by saying, think about how, if you were freeing up time, what would you do with that? I said earlier on, time for humans to be human. So for me, it's almost like saying, well, just try and work out, if you were able to get an extra 30 minutes every single day, what would you do differently, or what would you be able to do with that 30 minutes every single day? And then start going, okay, well, what in the work that I do, where could we use AI to find that 30 minutes for me? So it gets people like really sort of expanding it out and really being free to think, because a lot of the times in the past, where we look at technology, we treat it a bit like a hammer and a nail. The problem, let's apply technology, hit it. I think AI is slightly differently. AI can really encompass quite a lot of things. So it's got to be probably a little bit more strategic, rather than just, there's a problem, let's use AI as the hammer to hit it.
Great, thank you. So, I mean, looking at the sort of tech community, I know that you're deeply involved with an SME tech peer community. And from your perspective, how does that collaboration, the ideas, the momentum from that space benefit housing associations, or even adjacent sectors like health, utilities, or local government?
For me, having a really dynamic SME sector within Tech for Social Housing is vital. Because when you've got something that is fast moving and agile, it will roll out across the entire tech sector. So, we know in social housing we have some large corporate tech suppliers.
Hmm.
Um, Without the SME communities, like really sort of pushing the boundaries,
Mm.
it keeps those larger software vendors wanting to be better and
Yes.
wanting to either keep up or in some cases try and overtake.
Mm.
And for me, it's all about making the ultimate experience for the tenant and resident better.
Mm.
So if you have really successful, dynamic SME tech companies, you know, they're usually really focused as well on outcomes,
Mm.
and in some cases are very mission orientated.
Mm-hmm.
That's where you've really got people and organizations that are trying to do something for good.
Mm.
And working with those types of organizations, I definitely see a lot of that day to day.
Mm.
You, especially at the smaller end, the kind of startup to scale up end, you talk to a lot of people who are bringing their passion. I
Mm.
talked about passionate pregnancy. They're
Yeah,
bringing
yeah.
their passion,
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily for the product they've created, but for the solution that they're looking
Yeah,
to deliver.
yeah.
And I think that's an interesting space. They can
Mm.
they can be kind of the proud parent
Mm.
when it comes to their bit of tech, but the people I definitely talk to in the SME space are very much around more about focusing on that outcome, the positive outcome that
Mm.
comes from using the tech.
Mm. And it's such a good and important point because you touched earlier, and I think there's a saying, isn't there? Nobody ever got fired for buying an IBM,
Yeah.
wasn't there? That one. And I think when you talk to certainly the smaller or mid-sized enterprises in social housing, for them to think about implementing, let's say, Microsoft as a solution, or SAP or whatever it might be, because they need a CRM. It is a big, expensive, wieldy tool, isn't it? And they're never ever going to use a fraction of the functionality the benefits it actually gives will be good, but probably marginal in comparison to, as you say, they could work with perhaps a smaller vendor who's very boutique, who's, as you say, very mission orientated, outcome focused. And also I think you'll get more for your money, and also probably more functionality that you'll use. It'll be, and you might be able to tweak it a lot more than you would, if it was a Microsoft or an SAP, for example. So I can see the value there, and also it puts you right at the forefront, doesn't it, to see what innovations are coming down the line, so that you can constantly challenge, change, and drive innovation. The things that you've obviously said you're really good at.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that innovation and interesting and new uses of tech come from those SME,
Mm.
predominantly come from those SME vendors. Um, for me, everyone has to play in the same space. There has to be that ability to leverage the larger tech suppliers. And you do see this a lot now in social housing organizations where they'll have a platform like a Microsoft or
Mm.
a Salesforce or something like that. But then they will look at the SME, they will look at the
Mm.
startups, they will look at the smaller tech vendors for maybe point solutions that they've recognized that organization's really good at doing this. And we're lucky that technology's advanced in terms of integration and
Yeah,
interface and things like that, where
yeah.
it's still not seamless. There's still a little bit of friction there, but it's getting better,
Mm.
every cycle. So the ability to build a kind of best of breed infrastructure is a lot easier than it was, say, 5 years
Yeah.
ago, even.
Mm. Mm. Good. Okay, so innovation can feel a bit of a luxury, especially when resources are tight, and we know that's very much the case in the social housing world. So, how do you approach balancing the day-to-day, the operational demands, with driving meaningful tech and service innovation? Then, Stuart.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that crops up an awful lot. Oh, I can't do innovation. I can't be
Mm,
innovative because there's just so much going on.
yeah.
My counter argument to that is I've worked in the sector now for 27 years,
Mm,
and it feels we're stuck being Sisyphus rolling the rock up the hill and it just rolling back down and us rolling it back up. Fundamentally, the way we deliver services hasn't really changed in over a quarter of a century when it comes to using tech. So
mm,
that's the context I'm talking about here. So my counter argument is that with all the challenges that we've seen over the, let's say, the past decade, there's far more going on now around us that clouds our attention, that diverts us away from things that cause issues, problems, or whatever, new challenges, new regulation, whatever. I think we're in a situation now that if we try and just continue to kind of battle on through, we'll never stop rolling the rock up the hill.
mm,
There has to come a point where you've got to say, no, we've got to radically change the way we do things.
mm,
And I use the example of repairs and maintenance a lot.
mm,
It's usually the highest area of expenditure
mm,
within a social housing organisation. And if we're being brutally honest, it's usually the area that generates the most customer complaints
mm,
or customer interactions. Yet realistically, in terms of the technology we utilise, probably the last serious technological innovation was the move to using mobile devices.
mm,
So we're talking probably at least 15 years ago.
mm.
That's a long time when you think about just think about culturally where technology is
Yeah.
compared to where it was 15 years ago.
Mm,
Yet in an area that costs us lots of money, occupies an awful lot of our time, generates a lot of challenges and issues for us, yet we're still doing it in the same way fundamentally.
mm, mm,
I think that's where someone's got to stop and go, we can't keep rolling the rock up the hill.
mm,
We've got to stop. We've got to see how we can, really truly change what we're doing
mm,
for the benefit of ourselves and our tenants and residents.
mm,
So, so I try and say, why don't you think you can do innovation?
mm,
Why don't you think you can change? What's
mm,
stopping you?
mm. It's interesting, isn't it? And I think those are really good points. Because I think, and someone else in the housing space said it to me. I think it was the director of technology, Doug at Southern Housing. I don't know if you know him, but I think he said to me once, whilst the housing sector, it might not be the most innovative, they do have the time to be more innovative because it more so than most other industries. They're planning so many years in advance, aren't
Mm.
they, in terms of property infrastructure, and there is that level of security and confidence in terms of, this is going to be here in 10 years, we're going to, in 15 years we're going to. Then, if they can plan the innovation in as long the journey, and as you say, put it in into those key areas, the compound interest, the benefits that will come over that 10 or 15 years will be huge. I think.
Yeah, and also I think there has to be a conversation about what does true innovation look like, because
Mm,
I think innovation as a term is almost redundant now because
mm,
everything's innovative. But let me give you an example. Um, we want to be innovative when it comes to stock condition surveys and getting to understand more about the assets and the components within our properties. So what do? We probably go and procure a really great inspection app
right.
that has, really efficient forms and things like that. And I'm just thinking, well, hold on a minute. From iPhone 14, those phones have got the capability to, in real time, map a room and render it in 3D and actually have accurate, measurements. And I've seen tools where it will build almost a digital twin of that property, and it will tag automatically using vision-based AI. Oh, I can see there's some damper mold in the corner there. You might want to look at that. Or, oh, that's a Vocera 24S boiler. That's innovation to me
Mm,
because actually we're jumping ahead of ourselves. We're not using bleeding edge technology. Like I said, it's iPhone 14, so that's what now, 3 or 4 years old.
mm,
Um, What we're doing though is taking for ourselves probably a bit of a leap ahead of how we leverage that technology. So I think it just requires us. I go back to this thing I'm going to be talking about tomorrow. Free your imagination up a little bit. Don't be constrained by what's in front of you. Think about, well, if I was able to do this with just a mobile phone,
Mm,
what if I had that capability, what could I then use it for?
mm,
What else could I get from it? What other thing could I do?
mm. The art of the possible. So,
Yep.
fabulous. So, is there anything else that you wanted to say at all or speak about today, Stuart?
No, I mean, for me, what is positive is having been out and about quite a lot in the past sort of 6 months talking about tech. There is a real appetite for people to try to understand some of these new technologies that I mentioned earlier on, and that's good because it shows that people are now starting to recognize, that challenge of we can't just keep doing the same things. Maybe we can't keep tinkering at the edges. Maybe we do actually have to start thinking about radical change.
Mm,
But social housing, it's going to take us a while to get there.
mm.
But I think as long as we're starting that conversation and getting on those journeys, I think it's looking good. It's looking more positive.
Yeah, fabulous. And of course, if anybody wants to get in touch with yourself, I'll share your contact details and the
Yeah,
likes. And I know you'll be happy to sort of have a conversation.
yeah,
That's
definitely.
true. Brilliant. Well, I really appreciate it. Thank you for sharing your insights and thoughts, Stuart. Really fascinating. And have a great discussion tomorrow on AI. Thank you very
No,
much.
no, thank you very much, Michelle, and thanks for this opportunity. It's been a really good conversation.